The problem is abuse in real life doesn't always look like what we think it's going to look like in our heads. Like when I was a little girl growing up, I had this picture of abuse because like I heard my grandma and somebody talking about it. And I pictured like some guy in a rundown mobile home wearing like the actual wife beater with like cigarettes tucked in his back pocket and chewing tobacco, stuck in his lip and getting drunk. And like the wife was all like black and blue. And it's not only unfortunate, it's dangerous that abuse gets encapsulated in all of these stereotypes in all of our minds around income levels and appearance and the way couples act together. And it keeps us from recognizing that it's happening. It was shocking to me to live in the nice house with the cute looking husband and all of the adorable kids. And like we looked happy on the outside. And that just didn't square with what I thought abuse was supposed to look like. But there I was.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Gabby.
And this is our 4 Transit Connect that we've been living in. And we thought it was finally time to give you a tour.
What were they doing? We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl. He was slapping her? Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
I've seen a ton of videos this week on the Gabby Petito Netflix documentary from psychologists, forensics experts, law enforcement, true crime people, and there's some really good stuff already out there, but I wanted to share my own thoughts on this documentary because I don't think that if you go to college for years and study crimes forever, that you truly understand what happened to Gabby, what happened inside their relationship, and what we're seeing on this documentary. The way that somebody who has lived with life-threatening domestic violence understands it. So today I'd like to share a domestic violence survivor's thoughts on this documentary. If you're new here, I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take 2, where I share how I escaped 24 years of brutally violent, life-threatening abuse and got to safety and rebuilt on the other side. And if you've watched my videos, people get little snippets of some of the hard things that I went through and some of the horror that I lived with. But I don't often dive into the really dark stuff because some of it's just simply too much for social media. I am lucky to be alive. And the only reason that I am alive is that some friends, my therapist, a few other people around me recognized the red flags that were missed with Gabby and helped me get to safety. Before I even dive into this topic, I just want to take a moment here to acknowledge Gabby, not as a victim, not as Brian's girlfriend, but just for the beautiful ray of sunshine that we see on screen, for the bright, creative, kind, passionate woman that she was. The world is a little less bright because she's not here. And the loss of her life is a tragedy. I first heard Gabby's name just about 2 years after I escaped my own hell, when that first video of her in the back of the police cruiser and Brian kind of walking around the sidewalk was first dropped on the news. The moment I saw it, I knew that he did it. And I saw some of the red flags that I don't know if other people would have noticed. So what did everybody miss and what could they have done about it? The number one red flag that I think everybody overlooked is that Gabby was stuck. She was basically a prisoner in that van. And here's why everybody overlooked it. Because when you see a couple together, you assume that they want to be together, that they're in love, that they're adults who have free will, that they're making the choice to be there. It's not like Gabby was handcuffed to the side of the van. She had her own 2 feet. If she wasn't in love and didn't want to be with him, she could have walked away. The truth is, there are a lot of factors that keep people stuck in relationships that they don't want to be in. Some of the biggest ones for domestic violence are, number one, financial dependency. People will stay in relationships because they have to be there. Even if they have their own job, maybe they can't pay for the apartment or the van without their significant other. The investment in the relationship can often keep people trapped. Like, we've spent so much time together, or maybe we've had children together, we've bought this house together, we have a social media channel together. Like, we're invested in this. It can get really hard to walk away from the person when your whole entire life is tangled up in them. Fear keeps a lot of people in relationships, and that can be just fear of loss, like fear that you're throwing away a good thing. That can also be actual fear. Like, I'm afraid that in this circumstance right now, like I've just had a new baby. I'm afraid that if I tell my husband I want a divorce, that he's going to blow up at me and like abandon me, and then I'm not going to be able to take care of this baby, especially if you're with an abuser who's made threats in the past. Because when you're together and you're still trying to like keep the relationship going, you feel like you can control them a little bit. But the minute you leave, that post-separation abuse can just blow up, which is exactly what happened to Gabby. Another thing that really traps people is trauma bonding, which is kind of confusing on the outside because it can really look like this passionate love. Like, people are so snuggly, wuggly, they're totally codependent, they never go anywhere without each other. But it's not like a healthy type of connection. It's more like a drug addiction to that person. And it's really hard to break. So everybody overlooks this red flag that Gabby is stuck with this guy. Even though he hit her, even though the police were called and Gabby was unraveling, they come in with the assumption that this is a couple in love and we're not going to disrupt the lovebirds. If she wanted to leave, she would. What should everybody have done? They should have dug a lot deeper. From the law enforcement officers to her friends and family, everyone should have really questioned, like, are you sure that you guys want to be on this road trip together? And maybe her answer would have been yes, because she's trauma bonded and she's stuck and she can't go anywhere. Then they should have assessed the situation and made some decisions for her. Hey, Gabby, we're going to come out there and we're going to get you and bring you home. This is actually why I'm alive today. I shared with my mom one violent episode that happened at the hands of my husband while living in South Carolina, just one. I told her that I was scared. I was crying on the phone. She called me back later and told me that she wanted to schedule a time to talk to me and my husband together. And then I backpedaled. Oh, I'm sorry. I was really upset. I was being super emotional and now I'm not feeling like that anymore. I'm fine. Never mind, Mom. But my mom did not never mind. My mom called me and my husband back later that evening, and she had uncles and brother-in-laws and sisters and people on the phone for a domestic violence intervention. In that domestic violence intervention, just based on her thinking, maybe Jenny doesn't want to be there, maybe she's stuck. I've heard enough to now rescue my daughter. I know it took 24 years. They overlooked all of these red flags for a long time. My family made the choice for me. They said, we're going to call the police and have him arrested, or you have these options. You and the kids need to get in the car tomorrow morning, withdraw them from school, drive from South Carolina across the country to one of these uncles' homes or your sister's home or your mom's home. And they saved me. They rescued me. I picked my sister's house in Utah the next morning. I withdrew all of my children from school. I loaded up my little Honda Odyssey. My asshole of a husband drove me across the country, dropped me off, saved my life. They all offered me help. Here's what we're going to do. They assumed that I no longer wanted to be there and that it wasn't safe for me to be there and that I couldn't get myself out on my own. The second red flag that everybody overlooked was just the slapping that the guy saw that made him call the police in the first place. And here's why they overlooked that, because people assume that those are isolated events and that, oh, that just must be like a one-time thing, because Brian seems nice most of the time. Law enforcement was looking and seeing he doesn't have a criminal record for slapping girlfriends. Friends and family were like, I mean, they argue and they fight, but it's like a two-way thing. I don't think that Brian's like violent with her. Everyone assumed that it was just a one-off thing. Here's the deal. You've heard the phrase, where there's smoke, there's fire. If you see somebody hitting their girlfriend in public one time, I think you have to assume that he's done that before again and again and again. And this is just the first time it boiled over while he was out there where there were witnesses. So what should have been done about that? They should have assumed that there was more violence going on. They should have dug deep and really asked Gabby, does he hit you often? When's the last time? And in a safe way where like he wasn't standing right there listening to her. The number 3 red flag that everybody overlooked that just really makes my stomach hurt is everyone assumed that both Gabby and Brian could equally defend themselves and equally harm each other. Like, you'll often hear the phrase, it takes 2 to tango. And Gabby was using the word fights, like we get in a lot of fights, which is a word that me and a lot of my friends who have been in abusive relationships use around episodes of abuse. Because, yeah, the two of us are together and I'm screaming and he's screaming, but he's big and he's angry and he hates me. And he has an arsenal of weapons in our closet. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack out there for this because there are some men who have been abused by their partners, and there are some men who have been killed by their partners. But that's not typically the case. The data shows overwhelmingly that men are always a much bigger threat to women than vice versa. It should always be assumed that she can't defend herself, no matter how much it looks like she's an equal participant in these fights. The number 4 red flag is a little bit tricky, and I think that this probably gets overlooked a ton. And that is the abuser usually looks calm as a cucumber, while the victim is always completely unraveling. And this was one of my biggest barriers to getting help over the years, because I'm being hurt. I'm being assaulted. I'm watching my children get hurt. I'm being threatened. I'm terrified. And by the time I talk to a friend or my mom, or the couple of times that I called police, I was completely unraveling, hyperventilating. My eyes were swollen, snot running down my face. And Jake is like opening the door with a big smile. He's in his nice suit and his fancy shoes and his expensive watch. And he says, "Well, hello, officer. How can I help you, sir?" The person who looks the most upset is the one who's being hurt. I have my own personal story about this that is now so hard for me to tell. So I will try not to cry, and it just makes me so angry. But one morning I had to drive my husband down to where his semi truck was, south of Salt Lake City, and it was going to be about an hour drive. I got up, made him breakfast, was helping him get packed. He was going to go on a road trip for a couple of weeks to deliver some stuff from Utah to Pennsylvania. And after cooking him breakfast, as he was grabbing his jacket, we were getting ready to get in the car so I could drive him an hour across town. He asked me about the snow tires that we had put on the car, and if I had taken the receipt and gone to discounttire.com and filled out the little thing to get a $75 rebate that Discount Tire was offering as a promotion. And I told him, no, I've had a really busy couple weeks. I forgot about it. I didn't do it. The minute those words came out of my mouth, I regretted it. He started screaming at me in the kitchen in front of the kids. Like, what the fuck are you talking about that you didn't do that discount? It was so ugly. It was so violent. But I still had to drive him south to where he was getting his semi-truck to take off. And we drove all the way through Salt Lake City. There's like snow and ice on the road. I actually didn't drive. I was in the passenger seat. And while he was driving, he was screaming bloody murder at me. What was he screaming? Just generally, "You're a piece of shit. You were garbage." I told him maybe we should think about getting divorced. And he would tell me in this conversation, "I would never let you divorce me because you're such a psychopath that I wouldn't let you destroy somebody else's life." At one point, I was leaning my head against the car window, crying. And all of a sudden, like, my whole skull started to ring. We're just sitting in a car together. He's like a foot away from me, and he had taken a water bottle from the door of the car and just launched it toward my head. It hit me in the side of the head. It bruised my ear. My left ear was ringing from this water bottle. It also like left a little pink mark on the side of my cheek. By the time we got to where we were going, my eyes were swollen. My ear was swollen. I had been crying. I had a crusty nose. I looked like an absolute disaster. But I still had to go to the door of my cousin's house. He was our boss. And I had to grab some paperwork from him. By the way, I don't want to go back and re-record this segment because shooting it a second time and not being organic about telling this story just doesn't feel right. Throughout that car ride, my husband was threatening to run our vehicle into the median. He was threatening to commit a mutual unaliving on the freeway. It was a nightmare. It was one of the most horrific experiences of abuse that I have ever experienced in the 24 years of marriage. I would have some worse ones during our separation and divorce, but up to that point, it was one of the scariest. Anyway, I go to the door of my cousin's house. My cousin answers the door, and I'm wearing a baseball cap and my face is swollen. And he's like, "What's wrong with you? Are you okay, Jenny?" And I'm crying, but I tell him I've just had a really bad migraine all morning and I had to get Jake down here. So, I just don't feel good. And my cousin and his wife look at me like I'm a lunatic. Like, "Okay, Jenny, here's the clipboard." Meanwhile, Jake walks in the house like everything is just fine and dandy and sits down to go over what the route's going to be that week. I drove back home and spent a couple days just recovering from the abuse and taking care of the kids. And then I would find the receipt and I would get my laptop and I would fill out the rebate. And like 6 weeks later, that rebate card would come in the mail. And that's what I was digging out of the bag earlier. I still have this card today. I actually keep it in my top drawer. It is a reminder to me that my safety comes first. It's a reminder to me also of the things that I've survived, that I am lucky to be alive, and that I need to do everything that I possibly can in my power to keep other women from being in the situation that I was in, which is why I'm doing this video today. $75, you guys. He was willing to drive our vehicle into oncoming traffic and end my life because he was pissed off that I hadn't filled out a rebate for a $75 thing. So what can people do about this red flag? Realize that the person being abused is probably the one who looks the craziest and not the other way around. My cousins should have recognized that something was off. They should have gotten Jake on his way, had me come in and drink a glass of water, sit down on the couch for a minute. And then once he was on the road and out of sight, somebody should have asked me, "Jenny, what's going on? Why is your entire face swollen? My whole entire chest was splotchy. My eyes were almost swollen closed, and I had a wound on the side of my head." The police officers should have realized that if Gabby was in hysterics, that she was being hurt, and they should have acted accordingly. And I think the very last red flag that everybody overlooked was just Gabby being alone. You just assume, again, she's an adult. She has a car. She knows how to drive. She's okay on her own. So they send Brian off to the domestic violence friendly hotel, make sure that he has a place to stay that night. And they send this young girl off into the wilderness in an area that she's not from, far away from any friends, family, or any type of support, to sleep by herself and just manage on her own. There's something about being in an abusive relationship that can make you have this aversion to being alone so much more than people who are in regular, healthy, happy relationship. The world gets really scary if you've had any type of trauma. And if I'm being honest, I felt much more comfortable being with my abusive husband than I ever would have being on my own. I didn't think that I could cope with things alone. The reason that's such an important red flag to recognize is that you have to know that if you separate a woman from her abuser and she doesn't feel like she can be alone, she's going to go right back to him immediately. So what should people have done? They should have fucking been there for Gabby. The police should have gotten her a hotel. They should have helped her get a ticket home. Her family should have flown out there and picked her up. People should have stood by her side. And if they had, she'd still be here today. Should normal adults be able to take care of themselves? Yes, absolutely. Can they always? No. And can abuse victims? Almost never. My marriage ended because my husband picked up the last in a long string of escorts. And I knew that I could no longer stay with him. He was no longer safe for me. So after 24 years together, I ended our marriage. But in the next couple months, I really couldn't make it on my own. I had never had a job. I didn't have the financial resources. I was trauma bonded. I had all of the things that keep people stuck. And everyone just abandoned me. It was assumed that I was fine. Jenny's a 45-year-old woman. She doesn't need any help from anybody. I wasn't fine. And that's actually why I'm called Life Take Two. Because when things got really scary in those couple months after my marriage ended, I attempted to take my life. And I'm not here because I changed my mind. I'm here because somebody rescued me, and I was lucky enough to be in a coma for a while until finally waking up, and here I am alive with an anoxic brain injury that still gives me trouble to this day, 6 years later. Then I also tried to just go back to Jake? What if he gets therapy? What if he just changes? I don't have to try to do life alone. I didn't think I was capable of it. That attempt changed things for people around me though. And I had a family member help me with housing. I had friends who were just giving me grocery cards and gas. An old college roommate who helped me get my very first job. And then, of course, I started my social medias, and the rest is history. My TikTok followers and some of the friends that I've made through social medias have been here by my side forever, including Kevin, who was one of my YouTube followers. Having lived myself for decades in an abusive relationship, while also raising 5 kids, trying to protect myself and them, I think it's really scary how few resources we have for women in domestic violence. There was nobody there who was going to drive Gabby home. There was nobody there who was going to protect her from Brian. There was nobody there who was going to help her financially and make sure that everybody was okay. Everyone was just la 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 off on their own, doing their thing. The police officers oh, Brian, we feel so sorry. My wife gets in these crazy moods too. You poor guy, let's put you in this domestic violence hotel. We don't have resources. The domestic violence shelter is the best thing that we got as a country. Women need help. Women who have help successfully transition out of abusive relationships, and women who don't end up dead.